everybody, welcome back to the channel. Well, a couple episodes ago, you might remember we had this big video about ruled paper and the line spacing on typewriters and how to find typewriter compatible ruled paper if you want to type on ruled paper and keep the text evenly between the lines. And what we settled on last time was that Greg ruled paper, which is 3 lines per vertical inch, is compatible with double line spacing on most typewriters. But the problem is, of course, that mostly Greg ruling comes available in small 6x9 inch stenography tablets, and you don't really have the option of full-size letter size paper in Greg ruling unless you make some ruled paper on your computer printer. But in that video, I also left you with a misconception. I told you that 1.5 line spacing on typewriters was equivalent to 4.5 lines per inch. That isn't true, as it turns out, and I have my friend Kevin to thank for turning me on to the truth regarding how wide 1.5 line spacing is. So we're going to get into all that and a little bit more and what kind of paper you can use for 1.5 line spacing, so stay tuned. So typewriter spacing, the nominal 6 lines per vertical inch that most typewriters are ruled at, we get from the printing press world. And the printing press world divides up the vertical spacing of text into point system, and the point system is based on 72 points per vertical inch. But they also have a measurement called picas. There are 6 picas per vertical inch, which is equivalent to the single line spacing of most typewriters. Now, don't get confused with that word pica, because we are often in the typewriter world talking about horizontal character spacing in terms of a pica typeface is 10 characters per inch. But in the printing press world, a pica is a vertical measurement of the line spacing or character spacing, and it amounts to 72 points divided by 6 picas per inch is 12 points per pica. So a pica is 12 points high, which is a single line spacing on a typewriter. Double line spacing on a typewriter is going to be twice that. It's going to be 24 points, or 3 lines per inch. 3 times 24 is 72. So what about 1.5 line spacing? Well, it falls halfway between single and double line spacing, so that makes it 18 points. And if you divide 18 into 72, you find out it divides evenly by 4. So there are 4 1.5 line spaces per inch. So 1.5 line spacing is 1/4 inch. So if you're interested in using lined paper with 1.5 spacing on your typewriter, you need to find paper that's ruled in 1/4 inch increments. And as it turns out, that paper is called narrow ruled paper, and it is available out there. You remember, Greg ruled is a little bit more difficult to get, except in stenography tablets, right? And only a certain size paper, and you have that red ruled line running down the middle of the page, which might be distracting to you. Narrow ruled paper, 1/4 inch ruling, is more available now than it used to be, and that is compatible with standard 6 line per inch typewriter spacing at 1.5 line spacing. So in the previous video about line spacing, you might remember that I had found that standard Greg ruled stenography tablets were compatible with double line spacing, and I went to buy online on Senor Bezos's website a couple more stenography tablets that were Greg ruled, and I got them in, and it says right on the pads that they are Greg ruled, and I bought these online because they were perforated, so you could easily tear the sheets out. The ones available at my local Staples weren't perforated. Anyways, turns out that these, even though they say Greg ruled right on the front, they're not 3 lines per inch, they're wide ruled. Yes, so I'm going to have to return these to Senor Bezos. But in the meantime, I did go back to my neighborhood Staples, and I bought some of these True Red there it is, True Red brand. Stenography tablets. These are the standard light green ones. Truly Greg ruled, actual 3 lines exactly per inch. And I had to buy a pack of them. But that just means that I have plenty of paper now for double line space typing on these smaller sheets of paper. But with regarding 1.5 line spacing, I was interested in finding some paper that would be compatible with that. So now we know that 1.5 line spacing is 1/4 inch ruled, which is called narrow ruled. And I did go up to my neighborhood Staples just this morning and looking for some of that paper. Well, you want to get, first of all, a drafting scale so you can measure the paper with. Well, this is narrow ruled, and it is 4 lines per inch. I'm going to get some of these. Kind of a ivory colored paper. Well, I bought 2 of these ivory colored 50 sheet notepads that are narrow ruled. I actually measured them. They're 1/4 inch spacing, 4 lines per inch. But even the same brand, this True Red brand, had steno pads that were advertised as narrow ruled, and I measured them and they were not exactly 4 lines per inch. So you have to measure when you're buying these things. They don't always match what they say they do, which makes it difficult to order online, obviously, because you want to be able to check it in person with using one of their drafting straight edges, right? Well, okay, so these are the notebooks that I bought today at Staples. So this is the True Red brand, and it is ivory colored, 50 sheets per pad. It amounts to just under $5 per pad at the full retail price, although they do sell larger packs of these. I was just buying a couple packs, and of course it says narrow ruled. So let's test that out, shall we? And you'll notice 4 lines per inch, and they go consistently down the entire page at that same standard. I do like the layout. First of all, I like the ivory color, and secondly, I like this little date field up in the top, and then the way the ruling doesn't go quite all the way to the edge of the paper. It's a very handsome looking page. It should be really good for typecast blogging and personal letter typing, so I'm happy about that. So I can use this ostensibly with typewriters that do have 1/4 inch rulings. Now, not every typewriter, as we will see, conforms exactly to that standard, as it turns out. But in the midst of all this line spacing stuff, you know, the Christmas holiday struck, and my friend Kevin and his wife came over to our house before Christmas and dropped off a present to me, which was this pack of Southworth resume paper that he had custom printed on his laser printer to conform to 1.5 line spacing, which is the 1/4 inch spacing. He did a really great job of this. And he even created my own little logo and my own little letterhead, which has my address. This is a guy operating a camera, which is kind of appropriate. And then this is actually the Optima Super typewriter, which is one of my favorites. So he really did a really great job of that. So I have some cover paper. I have the body of the letter. If I go to more than one page, doesn't have the letterhead. And then underneath here, I have full letter size sheets of the same variety. So Kevin did a really great job with that. Took a lot of time. But the other thing I really was impressed with Kevin's work here for my Christmas gift was the fact that he went through a lot of his collection, and he was looking at comparing which typewriters actually tracked good at the 1.5 line spacing. And he has a list of good machines, okay machines, and bad machines. And I guess okay machines are, it drifts out a little bit between the top and the bottom of the paper, but it doesn't quite go all the way down through the next ruling. So it's like not perfect, but okay. The bad ones were like the Canon TypeStar 6, the Olivetti Lettera 22, the Olympia SM4, the Royal Dart or Royalite, and the Swissa Piccola. So this is the text that Kevin was using as a test typing. And if you start at the top here, this is the Royal Dart. If you start at the top line here, you can see the text is pretty well centered between the lines. And as it goes down about the top third, it only drifts up a tiny bit amount. But after this sort of blank section in the middle where he did a lot of rapid carriage returns, you can see that it's already drifted up, so it's starting to hit the upper line. The Swissa Piccola actually was very noticeably bad starting here, and it already is drifted out even 2 or 3 inches down the page. It's already typing into the line. So, you know, most of these typewriters do have a pretty good standard for maintaining line spacing, but some of them just aren't as good as others, and that's one thing you might want to check on your typewriter collection if you're interested in typing on line paper. When Kevin had variable results with the 1.5 line spacing paper that he printed out, I wanted to check out my collection as well. I don't have that many typewriters that do 1.5 line spacing, so it should be pretty quick to do this test. Well, okay, so this is the Olympia Splendid 33. We'll start off with that machine, just because it's within easy reach, and I know it's already spaces pretty well. Okay, let's review, shall we? So the Splendid 33 starts up on the top, nicely centered on the line, and by the time you get down to the bottom, it's still centered the same way, so it's really good. Optima Super, it starts out just above the line, and you can see now we've switched over from letters to period, so by the time we get to line 12, it's still the same spacing. And you can see where we start with the periods, and it goes all the way down and stays pretty much the same. So I'm very confident in the Optima Super. Here's the Olympia Reporter. It's made by Nakajima, and it starts off just above the line, as you can see here, at 10. It's slightly above where the 1 started at, right? A little bit more space underneath the letter. So here's where the rows of periods starts, and as you go back up the line, it is drifting up somewhat, and you can see now toward the end it's more about halfway up on the line, but because this typeface is elite typeface, it probably won't hit the upper ruling, so I would call this marginal. It'll work, but it's marginal. The Calibri, this is not true 1.5 spacing, or at least it's not the standard spacing, because it starts right here, and you can see by the time we get to 4 or 5, the bottom of the letter is already touching the line almost. So by the time we get to 10, it's already sitting on the next line below it. So it's definitely not the standard international line spacing standard. And then the Hermes 3000s, right? So this is the later French-made Hermes 3000s from the 1970s. It starts off and it ends up being very, very consistent in the line spacing. There's hardly any movement up, just maybe slightly. The older Hermes 3000, it looks like it does drift up a little bit. You can see where the 1 starts, the amount of space underneath the line. And as you go up to about 4, you can see it starts to get a little wider, and then up to about 10, it's a little bit wider. And then if we take off to where the periods are, see the amount of gap there? By the time we get to the bottom, it's just a little bit wider. So it's marginal. It's not perfect, but it's perfectly acceptable because the typeface is so small. And the rest of my typewriter collection is pretty much American typewriters that don't have 1.5 line spacing. Incidentally, I'm very curious on the Calibri because it was so bad in the spacing performance on 1.5 spacing. I'm curious if it will conform to the double spacing of Greg ruling. Now, this doesn't have a double spacing setting, but it does have a single spacing, so I'm just going to, single space twice to simulate double spacing, right? Well, it's pretty obvious that the line spacing, even single or double spaced, doesn't conform to the standard usual 6 lines per inch that most typewriters have. This might be an alternative standard that was used in Europe. I'm not really sure, or it could be its own standard, but it's certainly different than I would expect. And so that tells me that probably that list of typewriters that Kevin made up from his collection, they probably also have an issue with the double line spacing conforming to Gregg ruling as well. It's possible it could simply be mechanical wear, either in the line spacing sprocket, the teeth are worn, or it could be, for instance, that the platen is shrunk. And I think there has to be a relationship between the diameter of the sprocket tooth that does the line spacing and the diameter of the platen. Because really what it is the periphery, the circumference of the platen roller is the distance that has to travel to conform to the line spacing standard. And that has to conform to the distance between the teeth of the sprocket. If you have a shrunken platen, it's not going to go as far. And if you have a wider platen, it's going to go much further for every click of that sprocket tooth. So that's probably accounts for a lot of the difference between these machines, is just the way the rubber has been shrunken or expanded over time. And so that's just something to keep in mind if you are interested in typing between the lines of ruled paper, that you do need a typewriter where your platen is pretty much the right diameter. And there's one more thing about this line spacing on ruled paper that you might want to use as a diagnostic tool. If you ever have the question, I wonder if the platen on this particular typewriter is shrunk or not. Well, if you grab a sheet of either narrow ruled, quarter-inch ruled paper, or true Gregg ruled 3 lines per inch paper, you can use that as a yardstick for measuring whether your platen is shrunk or not. Center up the text between the lines at the top of the page and type a column of characters all the way down, and you can tell if your platen conforms to the right diameter, whether or not the text drifts out either above or toward the bottom of the line. It'll tell you whether it's expanded or shrunk, and that's a diagnostic tool as well as a typographical effect. So let's recap here. Wide ruled paper is 24.75 points. College ruled is 20.25 points. Narrow ruled is 18 points, which is a quarter inch. Typewriter single spacing is 12 points. Typewriter 1.5 spacing is 18 points. Typewriter double spacing is 24 points. And triple spacing, of course, would be 36 points. Well, of course, this whole project was just a deep dive into exploring the line spacing standard of typewriters, and also kind of a typographical style of finding ways to neatly conform your typewriter's line spacing to lined or ruled paper. I think it's a kind of a neat effect. I like typing on lined paper, and it's something that most of us haven't been able to do because most of us grab a sheet of either wide ruled or college ruled here in the United States or some metric standard overseas, and it doesn't conform a lot of times to the standard typewriter line spacing. So this was kind of a fun project. You don't have to type on line paper, but it is kind of fun to do. It's another one of those things with typewriters that we're discovering more things to do with them, and it expands our creativity, and that's what I hope you find also, that your creativity is expanding every day, and I wish you the very best for the coming year. Have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.